Hi everyone, my name is Emily Cash and I'm a product marketing manager at Tech. Welcome to our webinar, The New Features and Functionality of CMO 17, where we'll be reviewing all the great stuff that the product team has included in this release, including some features that came directly from our client base to the CMO enhancement portal. So thank you all so much for attending and thank you for being a Tech customer. Shortly, you'll be hearing from our Director of Product Management, Jim Montgomery, and our Client Solutions Consultant, Natalie Fitzhugh, on these updates, and we'll also include a live demo. But first, a couple bits of housekeeping. First, everyone is muted for the duration of the webinar. Second, if you have a question, please use the question feature on the GoToWebinar menu. It's 2/3 of the way down on the menu bar. Please don't use that chat feature that's there, just the question feature. And feel free to ask your questions throughout the webinar, and we'll be answering those at the end. 3, finally, we'll be recording this webinar, and you'll receive it via email shortly within the next few days, so you can easily refer back to it at your convenience. So let's get started. I'm now going to turn the floor over to Jim Montgomery. Jim?
Thanks, Emily. So just a quick overview of the agenda. We'll talk a little bit about the features that are available in version 17, discuss those at a high level, and then Natalie will take over and demonstrate some of the more interesting and easily shown features that are in the new release. And then, as always, we'll wrap up with time for questions and answers. And again, as Emily noted, you can enter your questions as we go, but we'll address them at the end. Okay, Emily, if you can give me the next slide, please. So just a quick overview. So some of the new features of CMO 17, the first of which is the master plan and conflict detection functionality. This is an enhancement to our permit to work capabilities within CMO. So for those of you that are currently using permit to work functionality, this is a way to enhance that by allowing you to, within the permit itself, to outline all of the different org unit entity combinations within your company that are impacted by the work that's being requested, as well as time and dates around each of those areas. So if I'm going to be working in area A for 2 hours and then move to area B and area C, you can outline that more detailed occupation of those org unit and entity areas, so that we can then be a little bit more selective in detecting any conflicts that might arise with other activities that have already been approved. So this will allow the person who's requesting the permit to work to know that there may be some conflicts with other works already approved and perhaps in progress, as well as the approvers would easily be able to see those conflicts as well and be able to use those conflict notifications to make determinations on whether or not to approve the requested permit. In addition to that, we've added some new integrations to CMO. So we have built in some REST API capabilities to allow for populating event data from external sources. So when you're in event perform mode, there's a new response type, and you'll see a demonstration of this that will allow you to call to an external system and populate fields within the event template in CMO from that external system. So where today there's a lot of manual rekeying or copying and pasting of information, we've now eliminated that need. We also have a new capability called lookup tables, and there's a REST API for maintaining those lookup tables, and we'll talk about that in the next slide, I believe. And then third, there's an API for creating events from external sources. So if something happens outside of CMO that needs to trigger an investigation form, for example, or maybe you want to trigger an audit in CMO based on something that has happened from an outside system, the ability to use an API to create that new event in CMO, and then of course move into CMO and perform the event as you would normally, is another part of the API functionality. So next slide. Additionally, we've made some improvements to data warehouse in version 17. So in the release in version 16, we were missing a couple of key elements. One was the indicator for confidential events. So if you have events in CMO that are marked as confidential, either automatically or through some part of the configuration of that form, The ability to then see in the data warehouse structure that an event has been in fact marked confidential can obviously allow you to take a little bit more care when reporting on those types of events. Additionally, any attachments that were linked to an event, the attachment information was not carried over. So from the data warehouse record, there was no way to know what attachments were connected with a question or in a form or with an action. So the ability to have the file path information essentially as to where the attachment can be found has been added to the data warehouse. And we've improved the ability in being able to install the data warehouse across multiple SQL instances, whereas the initial release was only capable of being deployed on a single SQL instance. That was very limiting from an infrastructure standpoint. So we've created the ability to span that installation across multiple. And then a couple of key improvements to the administration of event templates. So I mentioned previously lookup tables. Lookup tables are a new feature in CMO that are basically reference lists to drive your dropdowns. So where today each dropdown in an event template is managed locally within that event template, you now have the ability to reference a centralized dropdown list. So if there is a list that is used in 3 or 4 different templates, rather than having to change each of those templates individually, we can now change the lookup table either manually or through the previously mentioned API, and that then allows it to propagate through all of the templates that might reference that lookup list. So it's just easier to maintain those lookup lists. And then another great improvement is the first level of export-import capabilities. So when you're making changes to your questions and sections in an event template in a test or a dev system, for example, what this allows you to do is then export the finalized template with those changes and then import them into your production system. Whereas previously you would basically have to recreate the same changes manually. On production, we've now eliminated that sort of duplication of work, if you will, making it much easier for some of those simple event template changes to be moved from a test to a production system. Next slide. And then also we had a few client suggestions that were brought into version 17 as well. These are suggested through the Client Success Center, where we have the ability to, hopefully you're all aware, but if you're not, have the ability to make suggestions to improve the product, as well as to vote on other suggestions that have been made. And so we've been combing through that list, and we're continuing to review those items, and we have a few of those items that made it into this release. So from sort of a security and permissions perspective, we have the ability to override the time lockout. So if you've ever had a new user introduced to CMO and they've mistyped their password a number of times and they've been locked out, I think the default is a 30-minute delay until they can log back in, which can be really painful, especially if you're starting a training session with them, for example. Now, when an administrator goes into the CMO application and manually updates a user's password, it automatically overrides or removes that 30-minute delay, and they're able to access the system instantly. Another piece that we've added to the roles permissions is there is now a checkbox for the role to only access own findings. Those of you that are familiar with the administrative side know that there was a setting for this on the actions, which was a very useful feature to say that I can only see actions in the system that I have created or that have been assigned to me, for example. It's now the same thing on findings. So it's just a proliferation of that capability over to the findings permissions to say only allow me to see the findings that I'm responsible for. So that's, again, a role level setting. And then at the event template level, from an applicability perspective, when you create an event template and you dictate within your organizational structure what org units and entities that template can be used against, one of the pieces that was not working as expected was the ability to say all locations under a given org unit. And what happened before is if you added a new location to the org unit, the permissions didn't update, and you would have to go back in and reset those permissions to work properly. Clearly wasn't what we didn't find that useful. We got feedback from a number of clients. So now if you have checked select org units, all locations, then at any point, if a new location or a new entity is added under that org unit, because all locations has been selected, it will apply the permission for that event template against that newly added entity or location. So again, just some simplification in how we administer that. And again, appreciate the input that came from users like yourselves that gave us those ideas and voted those up so that we were able to prioritize those and get them in the next release. And if you're not familiar with this, please get with your account manager or with your support representative, and they can get you set up with permission to see that client suggestion system. And now I will turn it over to Natalie, who will demonstrate some of the key features that I've described previously, again, that are a little bit easier to show in this type of format. So Natalie, over to you.
Thanks, Jim. I'm just going to share my screen. Could I just ask you to confirm, Jim, that you can see my screen?
Yes, I can.
Lovely, thank you. So yes, as Jim says, I'm going to take you through a demonstration of a couple of those new features that Jim has been speaking about. And the first one that I'm going to look at is around the API. And firstly, we're going to look at using the API to pull back details about a crane. And this will be based on a crane that's selected in a drop-down list that has been populated by an external system. And this is going to be using this new API call library inside of CMO to call the external system and pull back the requested information. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start a monthly crane inspection. And I'm just going to fill in a couple of details such as the org unit and the entity. What I've also got when I am creating this event is I've also got crane asset tag as a field, and this is a custom field that's been added to the form, and this is a drop-down list of cranes that have been brought into CMO from the external system, and I will come on to demonstrating how you can keep this drop-down list updated. So let me choose crane 2. So that's now going to load the form for me. And then what I'm going to want to do is interrogate the external system so that I can pull back the relevant information about this particular crane. So now the form's loaded, you can see here that I've got a button, which is click here to retrieve the crane details. And this is using an API call from the API library. And when I click on that button, it goes to the external system and pulls back the information on the crane I chose when I was raising this inspection. So you can see that these fields have now been filled in, all based on crane 2, and this information has been pulled in from the external system. So what I'd like to do now really is just sort of take a step back and just talk about how you would set up CMO so that you could get this end result. So let me just save that inspection. So I'm just going to come into the administrative area. And I'm going to come into API library. So this is a new item that's been added to the administrative area. And we're going to be looking at API calls. And I think what's important to note is that these API calls are configurable. So they're not hard coded where you then need to get development input if something changes. You're configuring these calls through the CMO user interface. So let's come in and have a look at this one. So there's various settings when you're creating an API library call. I'm not going to go into too much details around these settings, but there's the usual, there's a name. So you're going to have a descriptive name that explains what information the API is providing. The URL is the link to the external system that in this example contains the crane information. And then there's other settings as well, such as the timeout, so how long CMO should wait for the external system to respond to the request to provide information. There's different types of response formats and around the headers as well. And then the parameters tells the external system which field in CMO contains the information that needs to be looked up against. So when I chose Crane 2 from that drop-down list, we are telling the external system that it's the entry in that field that the external system should be using. So that's setting up the library call. So that's setting up that connection with the external system. So what I'd like to do now is look at how you would configure that button that you saw on the form, that when I clicked on it, it populated the fields on the form with the details of the crane. So I'm going to come into the forms area. And I've already filtered on crane. So let me come into the draft version of the monthly crane inspection form. And I'm just going to drill down into that first section. So let me just come down. And here you can see we've now got a new type of response called API call trigger. And this is very much comparable to a button response. And I think you would have seen that at the beginning of the demonstration, that it was a button that I clicked on. So let's just take a look at some of the settings for this one. So you get some typical settings. So obviously you can change the text that appears in the button. So depending on what would make most sense, you know, here we're obviously saying click on this and it will bring you back the crane details. You can also say how often the button can be used. So is it just once, or can you click on it multiple times? Obviously, we've got our API library call that we just looked at. So I've got that set up in here. And we'll talk a little bit about the type of return. So when you make the call to the external system, you need to decide how much information is going to be returned. So is it just going to be one match and it just be one single set of information? And that's when you would choose the single record return. So in the example that we're using here with the crane, crane 2 only exists once in the external system. Therefore, it's a single record return. You've got a couple of other options about multiple record return. So maybe there could be more than one item in the external system that matches this criteria that you've searched against. So perhaps you want to be presented with a list and then you choose which item you want to use to populate the fields in CMO. So that would be storing a single record. Or maybe there could be multiple items returned and you want to store all of that information in the form in CMO, and you would do that using store table, and there's actually a new response called table as well where you would store that information. And then the final thing just to talk about is the response mappings. So this is where you are mapping the field in the external system to the appropriate response in CMO so that you get the right information in the right field in the form in CMO. So obviously by using the API, you have one external system of record. So in this example, you just want to keep your crane information up to date and being managed in one system, but obviously then being able to use that information in other systems, but you're only having to maintain it in one place. And of course, having the ability to automatically retrieve data, improves efficiency, rather than having to fill in those forms manually, a click of a button all of that information is there. And of course, it reduces error. You're not relying on people, typing in the right information or making sure they've got the most up-to-date information when they're filling the form out. So that was using the API call library to populate the form in CMO with information that's held in an external system. What I'd like to look at now is about adding an item to the drop-down list. So we're using in this example the crane drop-down list. And as Jim was saying, we now have lookup tables in CMO. So I'm just going to come back out to the administrative area of CMO and we can take a look at the lookup tables. So I'll come into lookup tables and I want to have a look at crane asset tags. Okay, so obviously I've got the name for this particular lookup table, and you can see that I've got cranes 1 to 6 listed. And obviously you could keep a drop-down list manually updated, but that goes back to my previous point, is that you don't want to maintain this information in 2 separate places. So what you would like to happen is if a new crane is added in the external system, you'd like the drop-down list in CMO to automatically be updated so you can start to schedule your monthly inspections against them. So instead of manually updating the lookup table, we can use an incoming API call to update it. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to switch to a different application. It happens to be called Postman, but the way to think about this application is that I am mimicking an external system just so I can show you how the links between CMO and the external system can work. So don't worry about what this is called or what it does. I'm mimicking an external system just in order to be able to demonstrate this functionality to you. And what I've got in here is a way to create crane assets, the cranes. And if I scroll down, you will see that as well as cranes 1 to 6, which we've already got in CMO, we now also want to add crane 7. So I'm just going to manually trigger this and to get that list updated. So if I now come back into CMO, and if I come back into the lookup tables and into my crane asset tags, you can now see that crane 7 is listed, and I can then start to schedule a monthly inspection against that. So there are definite benefits to using lookup tables. One is that can be a single list that's used in multiple places. So this could be used across different forms in your CMO system, but you're just maintaining that drop-down list in one place, and you're being fed that information from the external system. And then by updating the lookup table, you can update the drop-down list without having to create a draft of the template. So every time there's a new item to be added to the lookup table, you don't need to create a new draft of the template and publish it. And of course, this improves efficiency, reduces error, and it makes sure that everybody has the most up-to-date information that's being maintained in that external record source. So the final thing that I would like to look at around the API, and it's the third thing that Jim spoke about in the introduction, is the ability to schedule a monthly crane inspection for this new crane using an API. So this is its ability to automatically create that inspection. So rather than coming to the dashboard and coming in and doing the monthly crane inspection from here, I can automatically get that set up. So I'm going to come back to my Postman system. So again, this is just mimicking an external system. And again, I've got some information here to create the monthly inspection for crane 7. So I've got the information that I need in order to create this. So again, I'm just going to manually trigger this. And now if I come back to CMO and if I come into the events area, you can now see that that monthly crane inspection has been created. So having that automated external trigger for creating events obviously reduces delay or error, and again helps improve efficiency. So that was everything that I was going to show for the API. And I was just going to finish off with one other bit of new functionality that Jim spoke about, and that is the exporting and importing of event templates. So let me come back to the administrative area and into forms. And I'm actually looking for an audit form, so let me just find that. So I've got a draft here of my audit example form. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to come in and I'm going to add a response. So let me add the response. I'll just do a text one. So we'll just say this was an important question. I'll just keep that very simple. Let me just save that. And obviously that's gone down to the bottom of my list. So what I'm just going to do is I'm just going to drag this up to the top. So it's the first response on the form. So what I'm now going to do is publish this because I've obviously made a change to this part of the form. So I will publish the form. And then I've also got an option here called export. So I'm now going to export this form. So this is going to export it and put it into a file type that I can now go to another CMO system and import that form into the new CMO system so that it can be used. Okay, so that's exported. So I've got another CMO system open here. So again, I'm going to come into the administrative area and into forms. And I've got an option here called import form, and it's got .cmo. So this is the ability to import a form that has been exported from another CMO system. So let me browse to the file. Should be in my downloads. Okay. Okay. And then it just comes up and does some dependencies mapping. So it's just making sure that everything that the form needs in order to work correctly is available in this new CMO system. So it's just done that checklist for me. So I click on OK. And that's then going to create the draft, a draft version of this particular form. And then once that's done, you can see it's gone into that form. And if I just drill down into that, that question, and we'll see that that very important question we need to ask response is available in the form and has been brought in from the other CMO system. So again, by having this ability, you can improve your efficiency when updating existing forms or creating new forms and making those available in other CMO systems. It's easy to transfer the forms between different systems. So that was everything that I was going to show in terms of the demonstration today. So now we'll open the floor to any questions.
Okay, great. Thanks, Natalie. First, I just wanted to say a quick note before our Q&A. I did get some feedback that certain sections of the webinar appeared to lag a little bit, but rest assured on my end where I'm recording this, it's looking good. So that will be the recording that you'll receive in the next few days. So with that, it's time for some questions. First up, for the APIs, Natalie or Jim, is it real-time replication?
Sorry, let me take myself off mute. Yes, it is real time. So if the, obviously the information as it exists in the external system, when we pull back the results of that API are immediately updated. If that answers the question.
And then actually staying on the API topic, are there any other APIs that will be released with this version?
Shall I take that one, Jim?
Sure, that's fine now.
Okay, yeah. So we've started out with the APIs for our event templates, as you've seen today, but we will be evaluating other API opportunities with each new release. But if you do have a particular API in mind or that you'd like to see, then you can add that through the enhancement portal. So if there's anything else that you would like to see in terms of that API functionality, then please put it in the enhancement portal and we can review it.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, Natalie. Another question is there a cost associated with upgrading to CMO 17?
So I'll take that one. So there is no additional license or subscription cost. That's all included, but there is a services cost in order to perform the upgrade to CMO 17. So please feel free to reach out to your account manager who can provide the details of the cost for you.
Okay, awesome. How about, we got all kinds of questions coming in. So what kind of training material will be released for version 17? Front end and admin level, one versus another?
Yeah, I can respond to that. So we will be putting together training materials for the administrative piece. So for the configuration and maintenance of, for example, those API calls. There will also be release notes explaining the new response types that are a part of the functionalities that you've seen today as well. As far as front end training, that is typically handled through services. As always, when we design new capabilities within the application, we try to stay true to the functionality from the UI perspective. So if your front end users are used to clicking a button in a form, for example, it would just be a matter of configuring the form with the API call button and making them aware of the fact that that's part of the process of completing the event template. You could use that through text labels in the event template itself, or through creating your own documentation. But typically, the front end training, front end user training, is handled through services.
Okay, great. Is more questions coming through regarding data structure? Will there be a difference between version 17 and older versions?
I'll answer that one. Yes, there is a difference in the data schema, especially if you're currently using 1502. So between 1502 and 17, there are quite a number of changes, some of which were actually introduced in version 16, but some of which support this new functionality as well. So yeah, the schema does change quite a bit. For those of you that have data warehouse, the data warehouse is sort of our contract data structure, if you will, as in that's a data schema that never changes. It only expands with time. But if you've written reports against a data warehouse, a table that exists today in 1502, that same table and the same structure will work in version 17. So you won't have to make any changes to those reports. But the schema of the transactional database of the application itself has changed with this version.
Thanks, Jim. Another question. Does CMO 17 provide the ability for integration to external reporting systems like Power BI, et cetera?
So again, I'll take that again. That is the data warehouse module. So that's not a part of 17. That's an additional module to version 17, but that is the data structure that we have created for you to then build views or queries from an external business intelligence solution in order to generate the reports and the dashboards and things that a Power BI or a Tableau or a Business Objects is capable of creating.
Okay, great. I think we'll do a last call for questions. I have one more here right now, but if anyone in the audience has anything else, please drop it into that questions tab. But is there any way that we can see a demo of the master plan functionality?
I'll take that one if you want, Jim. Yeah, great question. Yeah, absolutely. So the best thing to do would be to reach out to your account manager and they can get a demo scheduled for you for that functionality.
Awesome. I think one last question here. Is the REST call supported on the iPad version?
Yes, on the mobile version, if you are connected to the internet. Obviously, if you're in offline mode, there's no way for the API call to go out to that external system and pull back information. In that case, you would synchronize back to the web or wait until you're on an internet connection before you press that API call button. But if you are connected to the internet, when you press that API call button, you will be able to pull back results through the mobile app.
Fantastic. And another question. Let's see. Regarding upgrading to version 17 and doing some data transfers from version 15, how big or small of a task do you expect this to be? Are we talking about allotting hours, days? Do you have any idea what that timeline would look like?
That I'll answer that one. That really depends on your specific implementation. The sort of the data conversion itself, or the upgrading of the database to the new schema is certainly done within a day, typically, depending on the size of your data set. But then you obviously want to make sure that all of your existing templates are working properly and that that the information is functioning as it did before. So the UAT portion of that is going to depend on your availability, the extensiveness of your implementation, et cetera. I would encourage you, if you're interested, go ahead and reach out to your account manager. They'll be able to get someone from services involved that's more familiar with your specific implementation and be able to give a better sort of high-level estimation of what that work effort might look like.
Okay, awesome. Another question. Would you be able to track historical changes to events? Example, an event log, if a date of a safety drill has been changed, etc.
Let me try to answer that question. So we have the history tab in the event templates that track changes made to the event while the event is being performed. If you're not familiar with that functionality, maybe reach out to support, but I feel like that's common functionality, so maybe there's more to that question. I don't know if the person who asked wants to follow up with more explanation or if that has in fact addressed the question you were looking for.
But that sounds like something that if they just dropped a line to the support team, they could probably sort that out pretty quickly.
Yeah, that's true, yeah.
Okay, they said thank you. So perfect. All right, any last questions from the audience? Just give a couple, give another minute. But really, these questions have been awesome. Thank you so much for these great questions. We like to know that people are listening when we do these webinars and that people appreciate them. So, so thank you. And you know what? I think that is it. So we'll go ahead and wrap up. You know the way to contact us. You can reach out to your account manager. You can also reach out to the CMO support team. Always happy to help. And you know, thank you for spending some time with us today. We really appreciate it. And as I said earlier, you'll receive an email with a recording of this webinar in the next day or so. And if you're interested in learning more or upgrading to CMO 17, just reach out. And with that, have a great rest of your day. Thank you, everybody. Have a good one.
Great. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.